Hey, Amanda, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Nice to be here.
Amanda, one of the things that we have coming up a lot is people want to know about what happens with their case after their case is done. What type of records are essentially kept? And say if a case gets dismissed in criminal court, what access does a judge have on that, on the family and probate side?
Sure. So that's a great question. So there are two types of record checks that are run in family court. There's the CARI, C-A-R-I, which is court activity. And then there is the CORI, which is the criminal offense records.
Right.
And what a probation officer is going to see is they're going to see every time you've been to court, every time you've had a criminal record, and they're very limited as to who they can distribute that to. They can't even distribute it to the other side of your case. So your co-parent would never find out the specifics of your case, but they can tell the other side, oh, parent A has some criminal activity. Now, what's interesting is that a judge gets the whole CORI and they get all of the details. And I've seen judges at trial, because judges can ask parties questions just like an attorney can. And I've seen judges not satisfied with the question, the answer that a client gives to their attorney on the stand. And they will then turn around and ask for details about these incidents and things that a party has tried to gloss over. So, it's not something you can easily run from.
Right. So on that, what in terms of a practice tip, because we do have some young lawyers who watch this and kind of want to know is in terms of practice tip, what are the things that you do to advise your client, to prepare your client to try to address that problem on the front end, so it's not such a hammer being dropped by the other side during cross-examination?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for all the young lawyers out there, welcome to it. So if I know that my client has criminal activity, or I know that there's been a lot of court activity and I know that it's likely to come up, I'm going to make them sign a request for a CORI check. I'm going to make them get me all the details, and I'm going to ask them every detail about every event that I see on their CORI. Because the reality is we're talking about kids and we're talking about child safety. And so a judge is going to be very concerned about that. You might think it's no big deal to have, a minor drug transaction. But if a court is trying to decide whether it's you or your co-parent who gets to have the kids, court's going to be very concerned about that.
That's such a great point. So other than drug transactions that you were talking about, what are other charges that a judge would see on a person's record that would bring about the most concern?
Well, they're going to see everything.
Right.
Most concerning are anything having to do with violence, whether it's domestic violence or not. And domestic violence is a whole other topic of conversation. Right. But I had a case once where the other side had a whole slew of assault and battery charges, and the judge really went into details on that.
Right. And I think before this podcast started, we talked about, obviously, anything involving the child, DCF was involved, any type of sexual assault allegations are also something that they're very concerned about.
Yep, definitely. When DCF gets involved, the court doesn't just get the criminal records that might stem from that, but they will actually get your full DCF file, and nothing's redacted. They get all of the information, and they can use as much of it as they find appropriate to make decisions about kids.
So on the other side, are there particular charges that a person is charged with or convicted of that will make them automatically disqualified to be a guardian of that child?
So you're talking about two different things, okay?
Right.
So to be a guardian is somebody who isn't a parent, and I am defining that specifically for your young lawyers out there.
Right.
And for a guardian, probation is going to run all of the checks, and It depends. It just depends on the judge. It depends on the circumstances. Situation might be very different if it's a 16-year-old who, parents live far away and it's all very amicable versus, grandparents who are fighting for a 4-year-old, very different sets of circumstances. If you're talking about two parents that have all the parental rights that come with having a child, it depends on how long ago the charges were, the facts surrounding the charges. Were they dismissed? Were they continued? Did somebody serve time? For example, if it's an OUI, are they sober? Can they prove their sobriety? So it really just depends on the facts.
Right, that's exactly why they need you. So, Amanda, when should people be calling you regarding these services?
Anytime you think you might end up in the probate and family court is a good time to call me. What I always tell folks is that it is easier for me to spend some time with you and answer your questions and hopefully send you on a path and never have to talk to you ever again because you never call me because you take my advice, than to come in 6 months into a case and you've got yourself down a path that's really hard to recover from. I would so much rather spend some time with you on the phone and tell you, I think this is important. I think you should worry about this piece, but not this piece. But you, your family, your kids, your safety, those are all the ways you call me.
Right, so it could just be people after the pandemic think it's a good time to split with their spouse, or it could be actually a thing that happened many years ago and they're looking for some type of modification.
Definitely. So I'm seeing a lot of folks who are, we've been in this for 18 months. They're making plans to move forward because we don't know when we're moving out of the pandemic.
Yeah.
I'm glad to talk to them about that. Everything relating to your kids is modifiable. So if things worked 5 years ago and they don't work now, if child support, I think I mentioned to you before the podcast that the child support guidelines are about to take a new version and about to come into effect. So if you're under a child support obligation, anything that needs to be changed, that's a good time to call me as well. But if there's an emergency and you and your kids are in danger, also a good time.
Right. So lastly, Amanda, tell us about the state of the courts. Are they kind of picking things up a little bit? Is it still kind of a slog? Or what's going on over there?
Well, first thing I want to say is that we went from a system that's been essentially the same for 250 years to a mostly virtual system in about 4.5 weeks. So I want to give the courts all the credit where credit is due. And the American Bar Association released a study last week that said courts are seeing cases delayed by about 1/3, and the probate and family court is the busiest court in the Commonwealth. And we're seeing delays that are unfortunately a lot longer than that. I'm doing a lot more virtual. I have not been in a courthouse in 18 months, which is crazy.
Wow.
So things are virtual, but things are moving. They're just moving more slowly. And we're finding that things are resolving more out of court because there are these delays.
So what happens when you're talking about when someone calls you about an emergency and now the courts are moving slowly, but it really is a situation where they're in a rush to kind of modify or change the terms for whatever reason? What options do they have in those situations?
So great question. And it's twofold. So if you're in an emergency, so I'll give you a situation that I've had in the past. If DCF knocked on your door at 3:00 in the morning the night before because your spouse, who fortunately did not have your child, got arrested, and you have your child, but you're supposed to return them to your co-parent later in the day, and there's a problem and you can't do that, first call me, and second, we will rush into the courthouse, we will handwrite motions, and we will be heard that day on an emergency. Okay, the courts still are operating. Same thing with restraining orders and all those real emergent issues that are on fire. They're still processing those.
Oh, good.
Okay, so that's the first thing to know. But with respect to the other delays and what your other options are, Mediation's a great solution. Taking things, just each side getting an attorney and coming to an agreement that you can live with. The courts will process your paperwork. It just takes a little longer. But if there are other ways that you can resolve things outside of court, and just rely on the court for approval of the paperwork, talk to a lawyer. We can get this done for you. We're seeing a lot of that right now.
Wow, that's wonderful. Amanda, thanks for coming on today. I definitely want to have you come back, talk about restraining orders, talk about DCF, talk about cases where there's divorce going on, but there's multiple criminal allegations. And those are definitely huge topics that we can't cover today, but thank you for coming on today.
Terrific. Thank you so much for having me.